City Council. Please can I remind councillors to speak into the microphone so that everyone can hear the contributions made. If the fire alarm goes off, fire exits are located at the back and to the front of the council chamber, and please follow the instructions to exit from their offices. For wheelchair users and those with mobility issues, please make your way to the safe waiting area on Peace Hillside stairwell. Council officers will be on hand to assist where required. An accessible unisex toilet is located outside the council chamber, opposite the members' room. A drinks machine and water are located in the corridor opposite Committee Room 1. Cambridge City Council is filming this meeting and a copy will be available to view in the coming days. Finally, can I also ask all members to be concise, with their contributions and to show respect to their fellow members. Agenda item 1, apologies. Apologies have been received from councillors Avery, Saris, Smart, Smith and Tullacott. Could I ask if there are any further apologies?
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Richard Johnson.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Peters is coming late.
Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. I would like to ask members to declare now any interest in items on the agenda before this evening.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor
Sorry.
Councillor Ashton.
Sorry. You're going to have to be quick tonight, folks. I would like to ask members to declare now any interest in the items on the agenda before us this evening. Members are reminded that they can declare interest at any time during the meeting if anything occurs to them during the debates tonight. Minute silence following the Orlando shooting and the death of Labour MP Joe Cox. Before we start this evening's meeting, I would like to invite you to observe a minute's silence to remember the 49 people who lost their lives and the 53 injured in the Orlando shooting on the 12th of June, and to remember Labour MP Joe Cox, killed on the streets of her constituency on 16th of June. As Chair of the Council, I have brought in for consideration Agenda Item 4, East Anglia devolution, despite the copy not being available for public inspection 5 clear days before the meeting. My ruling is under 100D brackets 4B close brackets of the Local Government Act 1972. And the urgency is that all councils in Cambridgeshire must consider this item of business during this week. Members will have noticed there is a blank page 13 and no paragraph 34. However, there is no text missing. It is purely document compiling error. I understand that the following people wish to address the meeting on devolution: Anthony Cartman,
Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me? Am I on? Testing 1, 2, 3.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Splendid. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was thinking of not coming today, given the reports of the spike in racist attacks following the Brexit vote. Think about it. A citizen of this city too frightened to go out of our front door to speak to all of you. Now, my question is to Councillors Blanco and Price. Given the media has reported that former South Cambs MP Andrew Lansley was the favourite candidate to be mayor, I found through Freedom of Information requests to the Treasury and DCLG that Lord Lansley has been in and out of the Treasury prior to the devolution policy being announced. My fear is that councillors have been rushed into making a decision on an agreement, and that's been pushed by the Chancellor. At the same time, we have the problems that we've seen in Westminster. My fear is, as European Union leader state, the Council is negotiating with a United Kingdom that has no effective government and is likely to break up. So therefore, I urge the Council to at least pause in any approval, as there is no way the Council can sign up to an agreement with the government that is in office but not in power. So therefore, my questions to Councillors Blanco and Price: are they content to relinquish their powers and funding to a potential mayor of Cambridgeshire that has a high chance of winning that election, given the uncertainties also that we have with what's happening in Westminster? Thank you.
Councillor Price?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Carpet, once again, thank you for coming and asking your question, which I think the essence of your question is, do we as an authority, or do I as the Executive Council for Housing intend to relinquish any of our powers to the combined authority and nature of powers that we currently have? The answer is no, we don't. We don't have to, and we have no intention of doing so. I'm not really sure there's any point in elaborating on that. I think that's as direct an answer as you're going to get.
Councillor Herbert?
Well, I was just going to cover the extra points that Mr. Carpenter asked, and fair questions. In terms of planning, in terms of the devolution deal document, there's only one reference to planning that impacts on the council, and that is that the combined authority and the mayor can develop a spatial strategy for the whole area, which is a guidance document, but which isn't a local plan. It's quite clear that local plans still, Mr. Mayor, would remain with us and other local authorities. And also within that, it's stated that as a council we would have effectively a veto. So no spatial strategy for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough could be developed without our express agreement. On the wider question, we've been discussing these issues before Thursday, and obviously we've reflected after the European referendum and the decision of the Prime Minister to resign immediately after that. I think the main issue for us, and we'll touch on it in the debate on housing, is that the deal document is not finally signed until after a period of consultation, and also a specific decision in October. And whilst the world may not have fully moved on by then, there will, we expect, be a new leader, a new Prime Minister, and there will also be some indication about what is going to happen on devolution. It is particularly the case that we would want to be clear on the housing deal before we sign up.
Yes, I make two comments. Those of us with long memories, there used to be a Cambridgeshire structure plan, and it sounds like we're returning to that sort of sensible planning structure on the back of this devolution model. In terms of mayoral governance, I to follow all of this. That's obviously been made worse by what's happening in Westminster. It's been confirmed today by the Prime Minister in the House that 2nd of September is when the new PM will be in. All I can really ask now and urge councillors is to keep us all informed with what's coming from Westminster in terms of just what's happening with this policy, whether it has been reconfirmed or when it will be, and finally when it will be reconfirmed. But I would also ask you to urge and consider doing a policy review of the risks associated with this. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody wish to reply to that? Councillor Herbert?
No, we'll just pick up those points in the debate, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Can I call Edward Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions. I trust that all councillors are clear what is meant by key route network, paragraph 28b of the devolution proposal. It includes only local authority roads, not the A14, A11, A11 or A428, and not the railways. While Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire is rightly preoccupied with the affordable housing crisis, we must not miss this opportunity to address some of the flaws in the local strategic road and rail network. Southern Station, the Newmarket Curve, Ely North Junction, the Ely Southern Bypass, the A14, A142 Junction, and the A47 all get a mention in the proposal document. But where is the Girton interchange? Adding connections to the A428 to the M11 and A1307 would reduce congestion on the A1303 and through Toff, Compton and Barton. Reduce commute times by bus and car from Camborne and Papworth to the city centre and biomedical campus, and make a park and ride at the Girton interchange eminently viable. Where are the additional connections between the A11 and the A11 and A14? Three-way junctions would mean that incidents and roadworks on any side of this triangle of roads could be bypassed without overwhelming the city and villages and huge volumes of heavy traffic. Where's the new railway station at Fulbourn? This would complement the new station at Soham and make the Newmarket railway line a viable travel option for thousands of people travelling to the city centre and, when the Cambridge South Station opens, the biomedical campus. So my question to Councillor Herbert is, will you take this opportunity to get a balanced set of strategic transport infrastructure commitments on paper from government before the devolution deal is finalised? My second question. In the devolution proposal under governance, paragraph 2, it states Cambridgeshire and Peterborough have agreed delegation of responsibility from the combined authority to city deal mechanisms. In other words, the city deal will continue as now. The Mayor's transport budget will be £20 million a year. The city deals will be £40 million for 2020. The Office of the Mayor will have its own overview and scrutiny committee and audit committee, yet the city deal board has neither. I ask you, does it make sense for the Office of the Mayor to delegate spending £40 million per year to a board that is lacking in public profile, accountability, transparency, critical overview, scrutiny and audit at the local level? Perhaps you think the Joint Assembly holds the board to account. Well, paragraph 4.3 of the Assembly's terms of reference states the Assembly may receive and comment on pre-scrutinised reports to the Executive Board, may offer advice to the Board on the discharge of its functions, and may review its work. Pre-scrutiny is not scrutiny. The qualifying of the function with may renders the Assembly impotent. Councillor Herbert, as Chair of the City Executive Board, will claim to be accountable to this Council for the Board's decisions. However, the Board has delegated many of decision-making powers to an officer to minimise delays in delivery. Councillor Herbert, I ask you, if the Mayor's office is to live up to its bidding for transparent governance and accountability, then the city deal must come under its purview. Will you ensure that this happens? Thank you.
Councillor Herbert.
Well, I haven't had notice of the question, but I'm very happy to answer it. In terms of the issues that have been raised, there is clearly reference in the document to the discussions by the Mayor, and particularly the combined authority, should that come into existence, that we will look across the geography and the strategic geography. There is clear reference in the document specifically to rail investment, and whilst it doesn't specifically mention the Fulbourn station, that's on our list as a project that we want to see happen. There's the particular priorities are ones that Network Rail have known about for some time on rail. That includes Ely North, which is a major blockage in the whole region. So there is a list of rail investments that would be we have a look at some of the accountability on the combined authority, if there is one, and the role of myself as leader or whoever's the representative of the City Council, then I'm happy to also have a look at some of the issues of accountability for the City Deal back to this organisation. You and I hold different views about the City Deal. And I had, as you might be well aware, I had absolutely no say in the governance model that was created. That was a creature more of the party that's in opposition now on this council, in conjunction with a government that they had representation in. So the only reason why I don't believe we should argue endlessly about governance on the City Deal is that that would take us away from a focus on other things. We could spend 6 months wrestling about governance, and I'm not sure how much at the end that we would have to show. But I do think there could be more accountability through here. I'm regularly asked questions through this chamber, but there could be more of a reporting back into the council. There's been a steady growth of these, Mr Mayor, functions that the leader takes on, and which there needs to be some accountability for. In terms of the role of the City Deal, the March motion that I'll refer to later did actually recognise the value of subsidiarity and of councils and the City Deal doing some of the delivery. What we do not want to have, Mr Lee, is a huge new bureaucracy based somewhere in the middle of the county, which will generate a new set of delivery and a new set of organisations which will be even more complicated than the structures that we already have. So I think what we are keen to do is to decide on the fairly limited funding on infrastructure that you rightly point out, that there is an element of local delivery as well as clear accountability. But we will be supporting clear accountability for the combined authority to this council.
Mr. Lee, you have 2 minutes for supplementary question if you wish to ask. Can I call Liz Brennan?
Municipal members are not only interested in their terms and conditions, but they are interested in their communities. So I've got 3 brief questions. We would want to be included in any consultation, and so too would any other trade unions. We wouldn't just want to rely on our employers to be consultees. So my question is, will trade unions be included in the consultation if the council tonight approves the devolution deal proposal? And given the different political views in Cambridge and Peterborough represented in the referendum, by 73% voting in Cambridge to stay in the EU, and in Peterborough 61% voted to leave the EU, how will these views be represented fairly in one combined authority with a quorum of 5? And finally, the report says that the costs of the mayor will be met by the constituent authorities. So how much is it going to cost?
Thank you for the questions. I have put an offer out already, I think, to have a meeting with yourselves and with GMB about a number of things, and this would be one of them. So I hope that during the meeting we can explain the specifics of what the consultation process that is proposed from July through to September, in which obviously trades unions, like anyone, but particularly because they represent the workers of the local authorities, will have a full say on. So I would hope that there will be that role. I'll come back to part of an answer to that in the 3rd point. In terms of the different political and the different needs of communities, if this proceeds, there are going to be 6 communities. There'll be Peterborough and 5 Cambridge districts, and they all have different needs, different interests, and to some extent different politics. And clearly our politics are in contrast in a way to the other 5, with the county being in balance. So the answer in simple terms is that within already discussions about sharing out business rates or sorting out issues across the county, we have to get together. And as other questioners have raised, different councils have different priorities. So the issue relative priorities, and will each of the members of that combined authority and a mayor, if we have one, will they listen to each of those communities? And I think the judgment will be whether or not the combined authority meets the needs of Peterborough just as well as it meets the needs of Cambridge if it comes into being. On the third question, in terms of the cost, my colleagues on the County Council, I understand, are moving a proposal that there is a sort of clear accountability effectively under the new proposed Joint Chief Executive for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And I think what we do not want to have is a separate new structure, a separate new organisation, not just because of the costs, but also because that is more likely to result in there being challenge between the new combined authority and individual councils. So we definitely want the mayor and the combined authority to be part of the existing system. In terms of the cost, I don't know what the final proposal would be, but it may well be that the proposed salary for a mayor might be in the region of 70,000 or 80,000. That's a similar figure to the payment that's already been proposed and agreed by government for a police commissioner for the same area. In terms of on costs, we would, I believe, all of the local authorities would want to keep those to the minimum. So we do not foresee the kind of staffing even that, dare I say, the current Police and Crime Commissioner has as a separate private office. We would want to see existing officers involved as part of that. So in terms of costs, we want to keep the costs down to a reasonable amount, but we also recognise that in a spending programme of this scale, there will be extra jobs because there will be people project managing and making sure that the delivery occurs. It's all still subject to the discussions by the council tonight.
Mr. President, you have 2 minutes for supplementary question.
I'm just very happy to meet and discuss these issues.
Al Hannigan.
Mr. Mayor, councillors. 2 hopefully quick questions on democracy. The first one, if councillors tonight are minded to proceed with the establishment of this new tier of local government, combined authority, will you be minded to seek a mandate from the people affected, particularly as this new tier of local government in our local democracy here is one which people have not so far expressed a direct view as to whether they want a mayor or not. And the second question is nowhere within the proposals, and I must admit I've only had a quick read over the weekend through the papers, but nowhere in the document could I see any reference to how this new mayor, this proposed combined authority, would be elected. And I'll just commend to councillors and ask that they consider the electoral process for this new mayor. They do so with a view to optimising proportional representation and that they consult on the options. Thank you.
Thank you. Was it Mr. Hannigan? Yeah. Thank you for your 2 questions. In terms of the process where we've reached, I don't find it a very easy process in that it's been a discussion between at times 23 leaders and civil servants and officers and ministers. So it has largely up until now been a discussion behind closed doors often. We sought to report that and share what's happened, but I think the opportunity is there from July through to September for the public to have a say. There is already a chunk of information on the County Council's website, and that they've got a special devolution page. And I will be asking that there's a lot more intelligible, shareable information that points people to what some of the real issues are in this proposal. So I don't think there's going to be a public vote on it. I'm a little bit reflective about public votes on issues at the moment. But there will be the listening and there will be the reporting back of all of the responses decision in October, I would expect all councillors to actually look at what the responses are and consider some of the issues that are raised. In terms of the election process, I'm a bit lonely on this side. I actually believe in proportional representation. But I suspect that the government will make its own decision on this. We can make representations on it, and clearly it adds an element of choice and influence, for instance, in the Police and Crime Commissioner elections. So perhaps we could hope that they will adopt a similar process. At the end of the day, this is a county of mixed politics, and I don't necessarily think that the political views in the Cambridge city are necessarily the same as those across the rest. So we will raise the issue of election process, but the government, I'm afraid, for good or bad, will make that decision.
Stanley, any opportunities for supplementary?
Well, not so much a supplementary, but just to say thanks for those comments. And in terms of the election of the mayor, I think it's very important whether the government, whatever that government may be, whatever their view they take on the election of the mayor, that I think it's important that Cambridge make very clear its view on the election. And I would hope that you would, when you consider the possibilities, go for the optimum in terms of proportional representation.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Call Robert Bozeman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I think most of the points that I was hoping I would raise have already come up, but I do have one specific question. I see, and it's about the impact of any view that's taken following consultation process that was described earlier. I see in 9.5 of the covering document, I think, that there's a warning that any change to the any significant change in the economic area following consultation would take you back to square one, if that's how I read this paragraph correctly. What's the significance of that happening? Does it mean that the timetable is disrupted? I take it from that, and from what's been said earlier, that it is perfectly open for the City Council to push for changes in the model that's adopted here without any adverse consequences, except perhaps the same.
There's quite a lot of detail in the Cities and Local Government Devolution Act, which lays out all sorts of background rules and arrangements which we'll need to consider before we actually formally go into such a deal. And as you point out, Mr. Logan, that paragraph reflects a few of them. When, as leader of this council, I was the only leader of a council not to sign the original document signed by 23 councils, it was proposed that that could go ahead without us, and that irrespective of the fact that Cambridge had said we don't approve of this devolution, that the other councils could go ahead. So some of what's in that paragraph is about that, and even the prospect whether or not there's a discussion in Norfolk and Suffolk or in Cambridge and Peterborough that reaches that kind of conclusion and one or two councils don't take part, then it will be broadly a government decision whether or not to propose that the devolution goes ahead. So part of that paragraph is that should we, for instance, not take part, initially there is provision under the Act for us to join in, but there isn't provision for us to step out as easily. It reminds me of another issue that's on the table. So I think I'll refer to it in the fuller debate, but the council does need to be clear about how the combined authority works and what is its say in that combined authority.
The other opportunity for 2 minutes for supplementary. Before we move on to agenda item 4, I would like to ask the Chief Executive to give a short briefing to members of the Council, to bring members up to date with the proposals that we have in front of us at the moment, particularly for those members who may have missed some of the briefings that we've had in recent days regarding this issue. Members will
and so those conversations did continue, and what we now have in front of us is a proposed devolution deal based on Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. There is another deal for Norfolk and Suffolk as well that's also being considered this week at the various council meetings for Norfolk and Suffolk. In terms of the paperwork in front of you, you've got at Appendix A the devolution proposal itself, and then following on from that, you've got what is called a governance review, and then a governance scheme. So to explain the difference between the governance review and the governance scheme, the governance review is the process by which the local authorities have to define the economic area that they are considering and make the case for why there should be an alternative governance or an additional governance structure for that area, and outlines the conclusions that have been drawn from that review. So the conclusions that have been drawn from that review is that a mayor and combined authority would be a sensible option for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area. And then the governance scheme, in the light of the review's conclusion, then outlines how the combined authority and elected mayor would work in the process. So that's the relationship between the two. So in terms of what you're considering tonight, you can't amend the governance review because the governance review has been done and is giving you a conclusion from that. You're being asked to endorse the outcomes of that and then agree that the governance scheme should go out for formal consultation. You've got two sets of recommendations in the paper because the final decision is an executive decision for the leader. So you've got the recommendations for the council meeting to consider, and then the leader is being asked to consider, in the light of the views of council, the final decision as the executive decision. So that's why you've got two sets of recommendations, one to full council and one to the leader. So the council meeting is considering the items in paragraph 2.1, and the leader will be considering the items in 2.2, and then obviously any amendments that are moved during the debate will be considered by the council. In terms of the deal in front of us, there's a mixture of financial allocation to the devolution area and new powers, and they are listed in 4.1. In terms of the headline finances, there's a new £20 million annual fund for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough over a 30-year period. You'll remember in the original East Anglian deal, the proposal was 30 million for the whole of East Anglia. There's an additional 70 million fund specifically for affordable housing in Cambridge, and that was not an offer that was on the table in the original East Anglian deal. And then there's an additional 100 million for non-housing revenue account affordable housing across the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area. And in the original East Anglian deal, that figure was 176 million. So the money in the deal, compared to the population in the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area, is one of the most generous devolution deals by far compared to what other parts of the country have had. There are then a series of powers which would be devolved from central government and commitments to explore infrastructure improvements as outlined in the document. The negotiation on the 70 million for affordable housing is that we would be able to spend that money on council housing and through the housing revenue accounts, and that's something that's been specifically negotiated on that basis. In terms of the governance of the deal, as the public questions have touched on, it would be a combined authority and a mayor that we would be agreeing to pursue. The government's made it mixture of information, better information than currently on the website, frequently asked questions, and people being encouraged to make views known through that mechanism. There will be a survey of a sample of residents across the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area, and obviously we would also want to be reaching out to stakeholder groups and making sure that that they're well briefed and are encouraged to respond through the consultation on the website as well. So that consultation would happen between the 4th of July and the 22nd of August. The legal status of the decisions contained in this report, again, I think some of this has already been touched on, but we are being asked to accept a governance review on a Cambridgeshire and Peterborough footprint. If any one of the authorities decided to pull out of the deal at the end of the consultation period, which each council will have to make that decision at that point, how they feel about the deal in the light of the consultation, then the government, if the economic geography changes, because one or more councils are not part of the area, then a new governance review and consultation would need to happen for the revised area that is now under consideration. And the main implication of that would be a timing one, because the schedule in terms of going through the legislative process to get a decision in time to enable a mayoral election for 2017 would not be met. Around the chamber, there are some additional briefing papers on the governance structure and affordable housing, which I circulated to all members following the briefing earlier last week. And that just aims to plain English some of the detail that's in the documents. The ultimate decision for you tonight as members is whether this is a good deal, and is the deal good enough for you to want to accept a combined authority and elected mayor, because they come together as part of the package. They're two halves of the package. And the wider question for you is, does the devolution deal enable you as members to deliver on the objectives you're trying to deliver in the council's strategic objectives for the area? And if you didn't have the deal, would you be able to achieve the objectives you want to achieve without it? And I think those are the key strategic questions for you.
Do you have any questions for the Chief Executive? Gary.
Yes, sorry I missed some of the briefings. Could you summarise in easy language which powers are being hoovered up from us by this deal? In particular, we're creating a joint investment and assets board which can just decide that public land should be developed. Do we still have the planning authority for those developments, or will that be decided centrally by this new authority? The other question I had was on the Peterborough University, because while I think it's always great to create new universities, we have two excellent universities in this city, and creation of a new university might impact the existing universities. So will funding for this mayoral authority go directly to that new university, and couldn't we include at least Anglia Ruskin University, which also has investment needs, in that combined authority deal? The third question I had was about values. It's very clear to me after Thursday that the values of Peterborough, maybe pre-university town, are very different from our values. So how do we ensure, given that the agreement is actually very slim on values, that decisions by the mayor that have an impact, for example, on the environment, on climate change, will not be be swayed by very different climate-denying politics that dominate some other areas in this devolution proposal.
So the first question was what powers are being sucked up from here to the combined authority? The answer is none. So none of the council's powers are moving into the combined authority. The combined authority and the mayor will take decisions over new money that is being devolved to the local area and a range of new powers that will come to the local area. So
just a quick question, we could just ignore the special plan.
I'm sorry, Councillor Gehring.
If I could finish you answering your questions, because I might answer what you're asking in my questions, or my answers rather. So there are no City Council's powers being put into the combined authority. The Joint Assets Board that is being proposed is a mechanism for the partners to consider how public sector assets are used together. The document makes clear that the only assets that that board would be considering would be the assets that the individual authorities were declaring as surplus to requirements, or ones that they wished to work together on through that mechanism. And the big advantage of the Joint Assets Board is it gives local partners the opportunity to try and influence some of the significant public sector assets that the government has, such as MOD sites and others in the locality. But we are not giving the combined authority control over any of our assets unless we decide. We would need to make the decision that that's what we wanted to do in terms of that Joint Assets Board. You talked about the strategic framework. It's a non-statutory framework that we would need to have regard to when we implement our own planning policies. That is the same issue at the moment. We have informal arrangements with partners through the duty to cooperate, where we plan together using not effective planning with a small p together to decide how we're going to accommodate housing numbers, for example, across the area. But the plan-making process would stay with the City Council through the normal processes, and through the City Deal we have a commitment to do a joint plan with South Cambridgeshire next time that we'd already set out, so that wouldn't be changed in any way. Peterborough University. Peterborough is a significant city. It's one of the few cities in the country without a university, and my understanding is that Anglia Ruskin and the University of Cambridge believe that that offering could be a complementary offering to what they do, and so that the business case will need to be made for that university in terms of the funding package that will support it. In terms of the values, I think the combined authority and the elected mayor will need to work in partnership together to reach decisions together. It's not very appropriate for me, I think, to comment on the different political views that might be expressed by members of that partnership at any one time, because that may change, and depending on how elections happen in the constituent parts, but those partners are going to have to find a way of working together to meet the needs of the combined needs of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough and the specific needs in the geography within it.
My question was not which values would you propose. My question was where in the proposed documentation would there be room for a preamble, would there be room for a mission statement of this authority?
I think the combined authority, when it exists, will need to agree what its values and mission statement is.
I have two more councillors who have indicated that they wish to speak. I'm aware this is a very big issue, so I'm going to allow a little more latitude for this particular issue than I would not normally have done so. But I would like to call on councillors to try and keep their questions on the short side, please. Councillor Sinner.
Mr Mayor. What, please, is this Education Committee? Is this stripping more powers away from the county and the unitary authority? And a Regional Schools Commissioner, is yet another post to be created and elected?
So, in terms of the Education Committee, what were you referring to? Sorry.
I'm looking at the document Cambridgeshire and Peterborough.
Yeah, sorry. I understand the Regional Schools Commissioner is a post that already exists, and this is about the combined authority having more powers to work with that commissioner and influence what they do.
Councillor Roberts, brief question.
Sorry, Antoinette, for missing the readings. Obviously, slightly preoccupied working with the European Parliament over the last 40 days. Two things. One, could you just elaborate on 6.1 on page 4? Just in terms of, not elaborate, but just probably more of a comment, the second one more question. The timings of this deal correlate quite nicely with the next Prime Minister, the election of the next Prime Minister. So, in terms of when does the key decisions have to be made, September is one of the dates, or that'll be the next lead of the Conservative Party, October, potentially for a general election. And it's not unrealistic to probably even expect a general election in May, where we have potentially the election of a mayor, an MP, and councillors. What sort of reassurances could we receive, based on the results today, that we stick to the timetable that is proposed, that we will be backing? And then my second question is just in relation to the bit of paperwork that came with it. In terms of the positions on the combined authority, there's a nominee for the local enterprise partnership. Now, as far as I understand it, some national funding does go to LEPs, but an awful lot of their funding is actually European funding. Structural funding gets decided through LEPs. Structural funding no longer exists in the next 2 years, so we're effectively giving a board position to someone who potentially is representing a body which is devoid of any real funding ability or power realistically in the next 2 years. So is this something which would be reviewed if the LEPs end up being not as significant as would potentially be the case?
So, in terms of the process for establishing the authority and the timeline, the council would be looking to make a decision in October 2016, as you say, that we want to go ahead with this arrangement. And the Secretary of State needs to make the order to establish the combined authority no later than the 4th of November this year. And the deal is predicated at the moment on an assumption that that is the timetable that we're following. And there's the government, in terms of where we are sitting here today, there's been no indication that the government isn't committed to devolution and going forward on that basis. So in that sense, if we're accepting the deal, that's the timetable that we're working towards. It's quite difficult to comment on the LEP and what the LEP may or may not be in 2 years' time, given the degrees of uncertainty. But certainly current government policy is that the LEPs are integral to this agenda and they want to see them round the table.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. We now move to agenda item 4. Having consulted group leaders, I propose to exercise my discretion under the council procedure rules to allow the leader of the council to introduce this item and to speak for up to 10 minutes, followed by councillors Bick and Hitkin, who will also be allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each. They will also introduce the amendments they have in their speeches. Other members of the council can then debate for the usual permitted time of up to 5 minutes each. The limit is 5 minutes rather than 3 because the council is not debating the motion. On your seats and circulated in the public area, you will note that there are amendments to the recommendations from both the leader of the council, Councillor from Councillor Bick. Despite being made available only today, I am ruling these amendments in for consideration under Council Procedure Rule 23.4 brackets 2 close brackets. I propose that the Council debate the recommendations and the amendments to them at the same time as we've been doing so for notice of motions. The amendments will be treated as having been formally moved and seconded, subject to identifying a seconder. This means that members may only speak once in the debate, apart from the leader, who has the right to reply at the conclusion of the debate. We will then vote on the amendments and the recommendations without further debate. At the conclusion of those votes, the leader of the council will be asked to make decisions on 6 to 7 and 8 and as amended if and where appropriate. I now ask Councillor Herbert to speak for up to 10 minutes, during which time please refer to the amendments and identify a seconder. Councillor Herbert.
Thank you, Mayor. And my tribute to you for getting all of that out in one go. So if I just build on what the Chief Executive assisted us with, and also remark that it's an innovation we could continue of having the Chief Executive answering questions on issues, because sometimes that might help debate, sometimes the debate will continue regardless. But if we just point to page, the front page of the main report that's in the Council's agenda, page 1. So effectively, there is a package of 3 documents that are part of your agenda: a deal document, a governance review, which is essentially the area, and the governance scheme, which is the start of the Constitution. And in addition to that, in front of you, councillors and Mr Mayor, we have 2 Labour amendments. One is that the wording of 4 is strengthened, so that we will definitely be bringing this back to full council. We would expect in October 2016. Timing to be confirmed, but it could be at the meeting of the full council on the 20th of October. So all that does is, Mr Mayor, it's just much more clear. It's saying this, after the consultation, this will come back, and what it's also saying is, whilst it's right, Mr Mayor, we take a decision tonight, because we are representing the people of Cambridge, we do need to take a view on this in our judgment. Nevertheless, the final decision is made in October, and that will be informed, as with the public questions, by comments made by people in this city, but also across the wider geography. My colleague, after the leaders' speeches, will introduce the new clause 5, and the purpose of that is to say that we've got a considerable amount of work still to do on the housing deal. As councillors have already asked, and Mr Logan raised the question, effectively, you can dance around this deal, Mr Mayor, but once you're in, you're in. And it is, in terms of the deal document, so it isn't just some kind of flexible deal that other councils, the combined authority, the mayor of the government can change. But it does mean that the council has to go into this deal with eyes wide open, and particularly on those things that are most precious to us, we need to clarify them, because that is the basis for us signing the document. I'm sure if we found that we were misled or things went wrong in the future, we could kick up one hell of a fuss. And politics being what it is, I still believe that if there was something seriously wrong with devolution, we would argue fully and long. But that's the purpose of that, and my colleague Councillor Price will focus on that in his contribution, because housing is central to this deal, because affordable housing for this city at a time of a housing crisis is central for all councillors. And there are 2 parts to that housing deal, but one of them is particularly important to us. So those are the decisions, and being a Democrat, and even though I'm now faced with the first opportunity I've ever seen on a council agenda for me to make a decision, I will be guided by the council's decision on this matter tonight. So all I would say is, in terms of the wording that spills onto page 2, that I would just presume that we will carry over the word ones have been very demanding and not altogether rewarding at times, but I believe that they're rewarding in the end, so the effort has been worthwhile. The geography previously was wrong, not because we aren't party to East Anglia and we show a lot of interest, but within 23 local authorities we wouldn't have a chance of representing Cambridge. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to actually explain the particular needs of the wider geography. And whilst this is a creature of local government structures that go back hundreds of years probably, those 7 councils, the county, Peterborough, Huntingdonshire, East Cambridgeshire, Fenland, South Cambridgeshire, they've all got something in common with the city. And we have worked with them successfully, despite the fact we might be different political colours and despite the different interests of the city, we've worked with them successfully. As Councillor Blanco has said, the old county structure plan and a number of other ways that we do business have worked that way. And it's effectively also recreating the old county geography that Councillor Adey sat on when the county council was a bigger place. So there is a geography that has been answered in the changes that makes a lot of sense to us. In terms of the issue of governance, the government has said that a mayor is a condition of this deal. We will discuss this issue with any incoming ministers, the incoming administration. But that has to be weighed up into the balance of whether or not we regard this as a deal that we recommend to the people of Cambridge. Clearly, as I said in answer to a public question, it's certainly my belief, Mr. Mayor, that and using your term, Mayor, that there has to be some distinction. And in a way, if you look at the roles of this individual, they're particularly leading on growth and transport. And it could well be that there's some discussion about what their title is if this proposal goes ahead. The combined authority, we will be 1 vote out of 9. We'll have an opportunity to veto any increase in the number if we don't regard that as good. But Cambridge has been a voice which has been quite able to put its position across in this county over the years. And I don't think we've had a bad deal out of it. So it is a case of accountability. There are issues of scrutiny, and we were considering some of the issues that are referred to in the amendment that Councillor Pitt is bringing forward. There has to be clear accountability of whoever's the representative. There has to be public scrutiny, and I got some wording put in on the deal on that. If there are any joint arrangements with Norfolk and Suffolk, then those similarly need to be scrutinised. I did originate the term brother and sister deal, and if there are brother and sister arrangements, they have to be accountable. Overall, having had 36 years involved in local government in and out over time, I believe that there is genuine devolution in this deal. I wouldn't support this. Councillor Adey's surprised. I wouldn't support this if I didn't believe that there are threats of genuine devolution. It may be that a future government may want to just try and shift down responsibility without the money. There may be the risk that in the future there's a different pressure. But this is the deal. This isn't a flexible deal. It is what's on these 30 or 40 pieces of paper. And people may have suspicions about that. But I believe, having looked at the issues that are raised about jobs, about employment, about skills, about rail, about roads, about a number of these issues, that on balance, and this is a question of balance, that it's a good deal. But it's the housing that my colleague will talk about in particular. Because in March we weren't listened to, there wasn't even mention of affordable housing in the document in March, not a mention. In May, we got £100 million offer, but that was for housing associations. And given the fact that there's not a lot of developable land for housing associations, it was also geographically one that in the context of Cambridge City was not necessarily going to deliver much housing. So housing is a big part of this deal. And it's central, I think, to the reason why we have been listened to. And partly we've been listened to because we said no, and then we said no. And then finally, this offer came through. And whilst there will be people in this chamber who will say, we think we could have done better, I have not seen an offer as good as this since the 1970s. So in 40 years nearly of local government involvement, you go back and see when this council has been offered a funding deal of this sort, of this kind, and of course, for 30 years we're under a Labour government, but we're under a Conservative government. So apart from the great efforts of John Healey near the end of the Labour government, and Tony Blair had to admit it on television when he was being cross-examined yesterday, we've had poor governments on social housing for nearly 40 years. And I'm not saying that this government loves what they're offering to us. It is contradictory to the direction that they've taken policy anyway. So housing is a key issue, but my point is that this hasn't been offered to this council in my lifetime as a councillor and my lifetime working in local government. So we're proposing this, Mr. Mayor, it's going to go out to consultation, and we will listen to the responses that people give us. We'll also talk to our colleagues in the other councils, and we will work with them, because essentially if the councils don't work well together, they will not succeed. And I believe that overall I can recommend this deal to the council. So the affirmative in relation to the recommendations, but I will listen to the other councils' contributions before I reach my conclusion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Big.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was waiting on tenterhooks for the last lines of Councillor Herbert's speech, when he actually for the first time said that he recommends this to us. Because so far it's been sitting here and defended and explained by officers only, and I believe that his recommendation is important to the council because he took part in these negotiations. On our side, we have some major reservations about this deal. We regard what is an unwanted extra tier of government, an elected mayor subject to minimal accountability from broad representative public opinion, and an administrative force fit onto an area that doesn't share a common economic base. All this is a very high price to pay for what has been achieved in terms of housing. And on housing, we would congratulate Councillor Herbert on the housing elements of this deal. I have followed the course on the outside of the negotiations as he has described them, and in terms of efforts put in, there is a result on housing, and we acknowledge it. No one can deny that those are positive steps, and that they are addressed at what we would all agree is a massive need in the area. But we have two issues with those. The first is that the negotiation did not succeed in squaring off the rest of the government's appalling policy on housing. So, without a suspension of right to buy, which my colleagues believe should be a real devolved local power to suspend something like the right to buy, and with only a discussion committed for some time in the future about the impact of forced sales of high-value council homes, assessing the positive contribution of this deal is like trying to fill up a bucket of water with a hole in it. We don't know how big the hole will be, and we don't know, to adopt a position of extreme scepticism, whether the apparent new money can simply be recouped by the application of the government's other policies through forced sales and the redirection of housing community agencies' monies to other places. So that is a major area of scepticism for us about what we read. Secondly, that even on a more optimistic interpretation of the future, these measures do not come close to meeting the size of the area's housing needs. Just to offer a point of reference, when we were leading the council, the 30-year business plan for the HRA was able to set an ambition for the building of as many as 2,000 extra new homes. We know it's not the fault. We know it's the fault of the government and not the new administration that looks currently impossible. But it does rather set the bar against which this deal, in respect of housing, should be judged. It's certainly something, but it's nowhere near enough. So, what about the costs of this deal? The deal, which masquerades under the title devolution, and here I would disagree substantially from what Councillor Herbert has said, masquerading under the title of devolution, in fact contains, to our minds, very little devolution from central government. It would be much easier for us to welcome it if it did. What it is a series of disconnected promises of different kinds to patch together enough support for a particular local structure which makes local councils a bit less challenging to the centre, and if at all possible, parcelled up in politically friendly clusters. This is what the Americans call pork barrel politics, handing out goodies to gain support for something else entirely. And it's a sordid affair. It is in America, and it is if it's coming here. But whatever you think about it, it emphasises a continued parent-child relationship, a perpetual dependency, not an attempt to create local autonomy for spheres and responsibilities in self-government. Now, if the support of this council for the combined authority and elected mayor is to be bought by some help on housing, even if it's small and even if it's uncertain, that's one thing. But it is horrible to think about those parts of the area which are intended to be influenced by promises as vague as the one offered to reopen Soham railway station. And someone else mentioned the same feature of the agreement. Local partners there are presented with a grand offer of support to accelerate making the case for it. I am sure it's a good objective, and there are many others of them in the deal. But these things are things that the government, if it's working as it should be doing anyway. They should not be holding them up as special treats to win support for an elected mayor, which I think the population in this area doesn't want. A large amount of the contents of the pork barrel are time-limited. They are streams of money that will end, or they are decisions that will either be at some point implemented or they won't. This sadly includes our housing offer. But the thing demanded from us is forever. There is no expiry date for a combined authority and for an elected mayor. And that doesn't command a price tag, but it means that things that do command a price tag in the future, or other decisions that have an impact on this city, are potentially subject to a governance that on any historical basis is likely to leave this city isolated when it comes to issues decided on the basis of values and priorities, the points that Councillor Gary was steering towards in his questions earlier. And a governance that will lock out deliberative decision-making from the cut and thrust that comes through a spread of views and a distinction between executive and non-executive responsibility. The sort of process that we're embarking on here. And a form of governance that obscures accountability by introducing an extra layer of government and overlaying it on an already dysfunctional structure that we suffer from but doesn't get eliminated. And it's a governance also that prevents the emergence of other groupings of councils over more strategic areas like Greater Cambridge, a true example of a functional economic market area, and incidentally what was promised to us in the city deal as a demonstration of the government's authenticity, something that is implicitly reneged on by the offer of this deal in front of us today. And if there's the greatest travesty of all of the papers we have in front of us is this governance review, which is the finest example I ever saw of decision-based evidence making. Starting with what you want and groping around for the evidence to prove it. It's a travesty of what our officers should have been doing, and I think it's very regrettable that it's presented to us for support today. Mr. Mayor, my colleagues don't agree with this governance, which we see as offering little or no advantages to this city, or its council, benefits in the deal into a fuller context. It's not to say that what the deal offers in this respect aren't positive, but it is to remind us to keep things into proportion. This deal doesn't get us where we need to be, and work needs to continue to get us there. It's a question of not losing our compass and recognising that we are not, with this deal, yet arriving at a destination we should feel relaxed about. And the second amendment that I'm moving recognises the inherent accountability deficit that will come with the proposed governance arrangements. It seeks to address the way this council responds to this if the deal happens. We can't change the features of the governance in this deal by votes in the council today, but we can obviously oppose or vote against the deal. But we can make sure that the person who participates in the combined authority, the leader or a substitute from here, is subject to accountability to us. And I think that we're looking here at a continuation of a trend, which correctly remarked upon is an extension of what we see with the city deal. Increasingly important powers are exercised from this council by one member or two members going off and participating in votes elsewhere, and we need to do something about that deficit inside this council. These are both constructive propositions for the eventuality that this devolution deal happens, and I hope council will agree so that we don't either rest in our commitment to secure the eventual deal for housing that the area really needs, and we set our own democratic standard for that part of this governance that is genuinely within our own control.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I have a seconder for the amendments? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first thing I'd like to say is that I find the amendments entirely acceptable, and I don't propose to make any further comment on them other than that I shall support. The second thing is that handing over the discussion we're having this evening are all of the uncertainties which have been created as a result of the referendum on Thursday of last week. And one of the things that worries me very, very much is that in the same way that companies up and down the country are now reconsidering their investment plans, so it may occur to whatever government is appointed in October to consider that they should freeze the investment plans of a previous government, especially as that government's main proponent of the devolution deal was George Osborne, and George Osborne, I believe, is toast. Cambridge is needed more than ever in this post-Brexit world. The whole justification for insofar as there was any justification for leaving Europe, was that somehow there would be a renaissance in this country, that we would find a new entrepreneurial spirit, that we would make a go of it, that we would show the world. We would go, you know, like Captain Cook going off into the distance on his expeditions around the world and so on. We're going to conquer all of that stuff. Well, we need Cambridge at the very centre of this. So I would also like, if I may, to pay a special tribute to Lewis Herbert, because of the way that he has handled these negotiations. And I don't think it's any secret. Councillor Herbert has not always found it easy to convince his own group of the merits of the case of devolution. And much of the opposition from within that group has been motivated more than anything by the desire to pin down the question of Cambridge affordable housing and how this deal is going to make a significant impact on considerably influence the quality of the deal which is before us. As for the deal, let's remember it is a deal. It's a compromise. It's an agreement hammered out between two bodies that in many ways have different perspectives and different interests. We, the government, and we, the local authority, are united, I'm sure, in wanting Cambridge to succeed, to continue to succeed in the way that it has. We're not opposed in this respect. And the two impedimenta to this development of the city is, one, the transport chaos, and two, the housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis. These are the two restraints, constraints upon the further economic development of our city. And the deal before us offers very considerable help with both of those. £70 million for housing in this city. It's almost unbelievable as an offer. £100 million for housing in South Cambs and elsewhere in the county. The fact that we have been able to persuade the government to seriously consider, and I hope accept, that we're going to go forward with an authority comprising simply the county and Peterborough rather than the whole of the East Anglian region. Another very considerable concession won from government. 600 million over 30 years for transport infrastructure, and that 600 million can be used as leverage to release private and other sources of funding. The figures are unimaginably large, and everyone in the city agrees that if we are to make any progress, we really have got to have schemes sufficient to deal with congestion and to deal with the fact that people cannot afford, so particularly people who serve the city cannot afford to live within it. So, or close to it, or accessibly to the city. We're also going to get something also unimaginable, greater control over our bus services. A local authority, once again, having an effective say in bus service. I would argue that one of the ways in which the governance problems to which Councillor Beck has referred is that we should seriously consider merging the city deal and the new combined authority. I don't see why they should continue to remain as separate bodies, and I think it wouldn't be difficult to bring them together and to bring their funding together. Another thing I hope for very much is that this city and the greater Cambridge area, including, in other words, South Cambridge, that we will come up with a single mayoral candidate for the city. If we go in for party politics big time over this mayoral thing, then we know who's going to be governor. Certainly the mayor will be a Conservative, elected by the county. So I hope we will unite around a candidate for Cambridge and hopefully for Greater Cambridge, including South Cambs. And I hope informal discussions will proceed along those lines so that we come up with a single candidate. And I think the city will vote in great numbers for that nominated person. And we might actually outnumber the votes that will come from the rest of the county for a person who will not have the city's best interests at heart. And finally, I hope that the great lesson of the referendum will help us to make wise decisions over devolution. The great lesson over the referendum is that this country has been revealed as having one of the worst problems of inequality in the world. And we have a similar problem of inequality in the county. 75% of Cambridge voting in, 75% of Fenland voting out. And is that because they don't have our values? This sort of Newnham sneering. It's not, it has nothing to do with not having our values. It has to do with the fact that they are deprived, depressed, and they don't see anything coming their way from Europe. And I think that the devolution thing will sink if we don't take into account the needs, the particular needs of the people of Fenland.
Mr. Mayor, yes, thank you. You'll forgive me if I'm slightly confused about where exactly we are in this. I think I'm speaking to the deal and moving, or seconding rather, our amendment as has been tabled. I was at the first meeting earlier this year where the original discussions for the East Anglian devolution deal took place with Greg Clark and Michael Heseltine in a room of 23 leaders of all the authorities across East Anglia, and made the case for Cambridge and the housing case, the case that we have continually put forward for that. We, as an authority, did not sign up to that original deal. That was subsequently endorsed by within this chamber, that we were not going to be part of that particular deal, but that we would continue negotiations on a Cambridgeshire Peterborough axis, which we did. There then came an offer of £100 million across that authority for affordable housing. Laudable, a considerable amount of money, but that was not in keeping, it did not meet the desires and the requests that we set out with government, with ministers, that we were looking at the City of Cambridge, and we were looking at, in particular, council housing within that. And we indicated as such. And then, not too many weeks ago, I lose track of the numbers of weeks as they flash past as deadline after deadline approaches, up came the offer of £70 million to be ring-fenced for Cambridge City Council in order to build council houses. Due to a great many changes the government made, and Councillor Vick talked about the self-financing deal and how that originally gave us a 30-year business plan, and we could plan to build housing. I'm afraid, the Housing and Planning Act and the Work and Pensions Act have actually scuppered that pretty much. We could not afford to build the housing. So we now have £70 million in order to build council houses within the City of Cambridge. I accept partly what Councillor Vick said in his analogy of a bucket with a hole in the bottom. However, without this deal, we have the bucket with no bottom at all. Everything falls out of the bottom. This way, it's still going that way, but it's slower. We will be replacing homes that we are losing and going to lose over the next 5 years. Without that, the housing revenue account will go bust. We know it will go bust. But we will still have houses. We will still have people in the City of Cambridge living in those houses, and we will not be able to maintain them. We will not be able to provide the services. This deal gives us a lifeline to be able to do that. This is the only deal, I think, on offer that is looking after the least well-off in this city. Everything else that comes out, most of the city deal offers are not helping those on low incomes. This deal, with this amount of money to build these houses, is. Now I could say, Mr. Mayor, that I have a principled objection to the combined authority being led by a mayor. A principled objection to the mayor. But for me, and I think for this group, that is overridden by our principled desire to build affordable and social rented houses in Cambridge. And without that, this deal is nothing. With that, it is a lifeline to the least well-off in the city. So as our amendment states, we intend to deliver through offices our Cambridge housing plan. So we can plan to build those homes that are so desperately needed within the city. There is still the other 100 million that will be spent through various other housing associations in and around Cambridgeshire, which is welcome, but it wasn't what we needed for this city. So I think on that basis, Mr. Mayor, as I see you winding me up, I will stop. But I have to say, like the leader of the council, I recommend this deal to this council.
Councillor Cantrell.
Can I reserve my right till later on in the debate to second the amendment from our side, Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to start by acknowledging what Mr. Cartman said earlier on about being afraid to leave his house and the racist incidents that have been happening around the country. So I'm sorry, I'm about that. One of the most important things in the deal, in my view, is the fact that it commits to continue to adhere to its duties under Section 149 of the Equality Act 2010. Since the agenda of the government after this referendum looks like it's going to be to strip away protections for people. So I hope that this will offer more protection than the government's going to. I have a duty to give a view on the deal as a whole. I agree with a lot of what Councillor Baker said. I think he's put it well about the democratic deficit, the decision-based evidence making. I think it's really important at this stage, with all the uncertainty in the country, that we remember what we do have in common. We've got more in common than we've got, which is different. But the way that democracy works in this country, the first past the post system encourages tribalism, it encourages point scoring, and it encourages us to look at what we've got, which is different, not what we've got in common. And I think we do need to look at bringing in proportional representation so that we have a system that encourages more listening, that encourages more plurality, rather than the single leader that this deal proposes. The problem with the mayor, in my view, is the same problem that is described as a benefit in the evaluation. It's not an evaluation, it's evaluation of three systems and then others involved with one vote. The idea that the single mayor will allow things to go faster, things like the city deal, like the A14 Wayman scheme, it's already going too fast for people to be involved in. Growth is rocketing, this series of schemes is rocketing at a pace that people cannot keep up with. It's seen as remote, it's seen as an elite, and I believe that a combined authority with powers to raise taxes, to support itself sustainably, and to actually have the time to debate these things as they come through, is the only deal we should consider. I'm against a mayor for this reason. But I sustainability anywhere in the deal. It's not clear where the money's going to come from, whether he's supplementing the money. It's not clear what protections there are going to be for the environment when this programme of building goes into overdrive. But it is better than it was. The one question, acknowledging Councillor Hipkins' point about progressive candidate as well, I'm very keen to explore this further, but not to look at it as a candidate for the city, but to look at it as a progressive candidate and as an expression of the principle of having more in common. Because people outside the city, as well as inside, will vote for a progressive candidate, and in this time we look at trying to build more bridges. If only we managed to do that with the Police and Crime Commissioner sooner, then we wouldn't have the regrettable one we have now. The last point is about bus franchising. I'd like to hear from the leader what the opinion is on bus franchising, given that there's a hearty belief in bringing railways back into national hands.
Well, we're running out of time, Councillor Gustin.
All right, I'll just leave that to you.
Councillor Aidy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This to me is not devolution at all. When we think about devolution, we think about the governments in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, where the people elect them directly. We do, coming backwards, we do want to see roads in Cambridge. We do want to see transport infrastructure across the county. I cry at the rock and a hard place that we're in. I commend Councillor Herbert for the work he's actually done this, trying to get as good a deal as possible. I share the passion of Councillor Hipkin with the lack of fair distribution of wealth in this nation. But I think only virtually in the United States is worse. We've been going the wrong way for 40 years. I could return to this chamber to watch powers stripped away from local authorities across England. Because this, to me, is what is happening. We're replacing democracy with pseudo-direct dictatorship, semi-elected dictatorship, and absolute nonsense. We were elected to represent our people. How can we allow so much to disappear into an amorphous mass in the middle? It's 40, 30 pieces of silver with strings attached to it as well. When you talk about 600 million, Councillor Hipkin, you know the cost of building 60 roundabouts and related roads. 600 million circles. This, no, democracy is far more important. We saw last Thursday, the people that had it, they distrust the majority of mainstream politicians. They want more transparency, they want more honesty, they want the chance for the votes to count in a proportional voting system. This goes the wrong way. This sets more fires burning. All they're doing is setting up dictatorships so as to take away local democracy across England. No.
Councillor Bajan?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to concentrate on just one area, really. I had a... I'll talk louder. I'm going to concentrate on just one area, Mr. Mayor. I had a letter from one of my constituents on Thursday, and I went and visited the family. The family live in one room. It's a small bedroom upstairs in a house. There's a mother, there's a father, there's a mother-in-law. The mother is due to give birth today. And I visited her in her home, and I contacted, of course, our house department. We have no houses or rooms or flats to give to her. And as for your 20 or 30 or 40 or 60 pieces of silver, we have to look no further than Finland to see the results of us middle-class people with our own houses comfortably going home to our own beds this evening.
than to realise why people voted the way they did last Thursday. There is lots in this deal that I find difficult, but the one thing that I don't find difficult is the 500 council houses. And for that reason alone, for no other, I will be supporting this motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I would like to thank Councillor and team for the work they put in to negotiate this proposal. Money for housing is something that I think we can all agree is something the city desperately needs. However, in reading the proposal, I can't help but think that in many others that basically we're being right to accept the deal in exchange for what is a huge democratic deficit. So, Mr. Mayor, the question I find myself asking, and the sense I get from across the chamber is the question other people find themselves asking themselves, is it worth it? Prior to Thursday, I was wavering on this issue. However, the events of the last few days made it clear that creating democratic deficits can lead to a real cost to the country. Now, I'm not saying that anything we decide here today is going to plunge the country into quite as much chaos as Boris and Gove have managed. Members of government elected by just 24.5% of the electorate. But in light of this chaos, now is a dangerous time for us to introduce yet another layer of government which will magnify the worst aspects of the first past the post and result in nearly total domination by one party. Our residents want to know who to talk to about their concerns. Their views need to matter, they need to know their views matter, and we need to be able to take their views into account. Without much more clarity, they will not thank us for creating a mayor unrepresentative of Cambridge and with limited accountability, if any, to its residents. I'm also wary of looking too favourably on the deal with details on critical issues, such as the higher value sales, are still under discussion. We are always, of course, at the risk of legislative change, undermining our best efforts. But we find ourselves in a time of huge political turmoil, and we cannot ignore that, and we do not know precisely what hue the government of October will be, let alone in 2017 and beyond. A government in October, by the way, will be elected by, if my sums are correct, 0.003% of the population. Those being members of the Conservative Party. There is a clear risk we could find ourselves down a path we do not wish to take. In short, Mr. Mayor, I am keen for negotiations to continue, of course, and for more detail to be developed on what is, on first glance, a tempting deal. But I'm not yet sure that this deal, overall as a whole, particularly given the speed with which the government is trying to push this on us, is in the best interest of the residents.
Thank you, Councillor Athena.
Thank you. Before I talk about devolution, I just wanted to respond to Councillor Bailey's point about why people voted leave. In my experience, those who voted leave were middle class as well as less well off, and they voted leave because they were told that if they did so, there would be more money for the NHS and other public services. That claim was very close to a direct lie, as we can see by the immediate row back, but don't let's pretend that it was is that we have to agree to a whole range of other government demands, which would be very, very bad for the city. When the councils across Cambridgeshire rejected the Three Counties deal, one of the major objections from councils of all political persuasions was the insistence on a directly elected mayor and the creation of a new tier of government. Here in Cambridge, we already have the district council, the county council and the city deal board, all trying to coordinate with each other over issues of transport and planning. This devolution deal would add 2 new players on top of the current 3 layers of government, the directly elected mayor and the combined authority. To have 5 separate organisations, councils, boards dealing with similar matters is not only hugely inefficient, but also incredibly unaccountable. There are already massive concerns within the city over the lack of accountability of the City Deal Board. The lack of accountability and scrutiny that would come with this new combined authority would make the City Deal Board look like a model of transparency. Residents who struggle to make their voices heard over City Deal decisions will find it incredibly much harder to have any influence at all over this combined authority. With a city representation, with 1 city representative, sitting with representatives of 6 other councils, all of those 6 councils have Conservative majorities, and which is likely to be chaired by a Conservative mayor. How likely would it be that the needs of this city could be possibly properly represented under those circumstances? That is why, welcome though the housing offer may be, this deal represents a very dangerous Trojan horse, which could do infinitely more harm to the city than the welcome housing offer could justify. I would also like to respond to Councillor Hipkins' point regarding the city deal being rolled in with the devolution deal. I fear that is exactly what will happen, and as soon as it does, the 500 million in the second tranche of the city deal will be spent in the north of the county. There may be a fair argument for that. There are grave needs in the north of the county. But this council, when it is voting tonight, should have its eyes open that this deal could lead to the city deal money, which was intended to help solve the transport problems here in Cambridge, being given to the new combined authority, dominated by Conservative councils who are desperate to build more roads, bringing more traffic into Cambridge. For health and environmental reasons, we should be building public transport and cycle infrastructure, and the city deal, for all its many faults, has focused on that. If this deal goes through, I have grave fears that rather than the Chisholm Trail, we will have more dual carriageways and more cars arriving in Cambridge. Welcome though the housing offer in this deal is, it could not justify handing such a level of control over to a distant and undemocratic combined authority, reinforced by the current, my fears over this have been reinforced by the current turmoil in Parliament, which makes the promises we've been offered in the housing deal look even more risky. We have no guarantee whatsoever that a new Prime Minister wouldn't change the rules on rent and right to buy, so that any money which would come from the deal promptly disappears, either into the pockets of developers or back to central government. The case of the need for affordable housing in Cambridge is absolutely obvious. The government, having been convinced of that need, should provide the money and not link it to this gerrymandering governance in this deal. What this council would lose in terms of accountability and transparency is too important to be outweighed by a housing offer, which I fear will turn out to be fake.
Councillor Bailey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm afraid Councillor Netzinger almost said everything I wanted to say. Thank you, Councillor Hipkin, for your sneer about Union residents.
Not my sneer, your sneer.
I think it's incredible how much disregard you have for some of the residents of our city. And the question I have here is, how much do we trust the Tory administration? Right? Because I think we are creating an undemocratic layer of government. There's unease across the chamber. We have very little in terms of accountability, in terms of real governance close to the people. It will be yet another distant decision maker. And it comes with a a very, very sweet deal. I think there's no doubt about the sweetness of this deal. It makes it incredibly hard to just completely reject it. The question is, will these millions of pounds actually ever land in our coffers now that we've got a recession coming, now that government is clearly occupied with very different matters, and how are we ensuring that the interests of all the residents, and not just the residents of the Tory-dominated areas, are actually benefiting from this devolution deal? And it's very difficult for me to see how we can ensure that that happens without any kind of statement of values in the agreement that we're actually making, without any reference to sustainable development, to climate change. There's a tiny reference to a low-carbon economy. We are actually much more ambitious here in Cambridge. We want zero carbon growth. How are we ensuring this if we are lumped together in a much bigger authority? And I slightly disagree with the officer, even though that's a bit unfair here, because I think this central plan has a lot of power in our planning structure. And I doubt that if there's a clear instruction from this new mayoral authority, that the city could just turn around and ignore those instructions. Right? It's devolved power from central government. We have to follow those central government instructions. We will have to follow those mayoral instructions. And I think that's one of the greatest dangers of this deal.
Councillor Austin?
This is really just a quick one, but it's in relation to the concern that I can see emerging, certainly with the residents who I speak to. What's happened this week, I think, is going to mean that we're going to have much harder jobs in convincing our residents that we're working with, and I think they're getting increasingly a concern about what the political agendas are, and as councillors we are to a certain extent lumped into that political agenda. And I see the concern that they have in the layers of governance, certainly in the city deal. I see the concern of having able to get their voices heard. And when they believe that they do get their voices heard, they believe they're not being listened to. And all this is going to do is add, like many people have said, another layer of government. Excuse me. And so it's on that basis that I am greatly concerned and greatly alarmed. But we're offering them a consultation. That's what we can say, we're offering them a consultation. That consultation is during the summer holiday period that people have. Devolution is incredibly complex. They've got to have a look at it in relation to, it's taken us a long while to understand, they've got to look at it in relation to assuming they understand the other layers of government. We're offering them consultation when they're not really going to be around. So I would say, at the very least, if you're going ahead, we should certainly extend that. I appreciate the houses, of course I do, like everybody else. There's no way we wouldn't. It is a good deal, but it's a short-term gain for a huge long-term problem, and we have to understand that. Another layer of governance is not right in this particular point in time.
That's more.
Thank you, Mayor. To me, a core issue is this long-term sustainability of this city. It's the yardstick by which we should measure this. Now, I think that the social housing is clearly one key, and I think Councillor Herbert has done an extraordinary job pulling king-sized rabbit out of a hat, which we didn't believe was there. And I think we should applaud what he's managed to do. I welcome that wholeheartedly. But given the national turmoil, what can be done to ensure that the hole in the bucket that's been referred to is plugged? That's the first question. The second is, the social housing requirement is far greater than the offer that has been made. Now, this is a terrible dilemma. I see the same kind of a problem as Councillor Bajan sees, and I can't do anything about it either until we get more housing. So I am very empathetic. Let me finish. So I'm very pleased with that side, even though it's not as much as I would like. Going to the second point I'd like to make, the transport infrastructure, I'm concerned about the city deal being weakened. I'm concerned because, again, the transport infrastructure needs far more funding over this time period than we've been offered so far. So I'm concerned about that. The last bit is the democratic deficit. This country fell into voting against remaining in the EU due to poor leadership by different individuals not explaining the real benefits of remaining in the EU. I don't want to point any fingers anywhere because it was happening everywhere. The democratic deficit in the EU, the fact that we can't vote out the civil servants, the international or the supranational civil servants, was regularly cited as a major problem. Now, this proposed new mayor concentrates power like a holding company, controlling a holding company, controlling us. Our electorate will become even more disillusioned with it. Funding streams from the government will demand us dancing to the government's strings in order to get them. And I'm very concerned about that. Thank you.
Councillor Cantrell, I've run out of speakers.
So it's my turn then, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the offer of funding for social housing in Cambridge should be welcomed, and I've heard this evening members on both sides of this chamber welcoming that funding. We've heard that this administration brought forward proposals for 2,000 council houses at a cost of 286 million a number of years ago. And we've also heard that the issue of housing, together with transport, are the two key challenges that this city faces, and something that the residents look to us as their representatives to try and solve. However, Mr. Mayor, we've also heard that whilst we welcome the funding for housing, we have to ask the question whether it is enough. Did we get as good a deal as we could have got? Is it enough? Is it enough on the basis of the money alone, 70 odd million, when the need really was 286 million? Is it enough to meet the true housing needs of this city? And is it enough when we don't really have the grasp of the detail, both in relation to clarity regarding retention on right to buy and the right to acquire in relation to housing associations? And Mr. Mayor, you know, the Treasury have a bit of a record on this. Let's just roll back, because that 30-year plan, as Councillor Price quite rightly identifies, we identified 2,000 houses, a 30-year plan, we took the money, and with a stroke of the pen, the Treasury destroyed that business model. So they have RAP on this. They have RAP. So, Mr. Mayor, we have to ask ourselves the question, are we being handed the money with one hand? And actually, it's not about a bucket with a hole. We don't even get the bucket. because they don't even give us the money in the end. Actually, they just transfer it from one hand to their other hand. They don't even get the money. So this is a fundamental question for me, Mr. Mayor. And the deal as it stands, I'm yet to be convinced of the certainty of that money flowing to the authority. And I hope colleagues opposite will be able to convince me of that, either tonight or in future sessions when we consider this. But Mr. Mayor, I then turn to the governor's proposals in relation to this devolved structure. And again, as colleagues have already mentioned, there is a material democratic deficit. It's a material democratic deficit in that it doesn't devolve power, it elevates power. It doesn't devolve it to the people, it elevates it. And then to top it all, there's a material democratic deficit in that it doesn't offer true scrutiny at all. As our amendment proposes, and I think members opposite concur, we are trying to retrofit scrutiny here within this chamber in terms of representative within that devolved authority, but that doesn't address the fundamental deficit of democratic accountability within the combined authority itself. And finally, Mr. Mayor, what I really object to is the way in which the Treasury, they have linked the funding of the housing explicitly to the combined authority. Explicitly. We're being offered a bribe. If we were so important, why didn't they give us the money straight away? Why didn't they give us the money? And actually, following Thursday, Mr. Mayor, you know, the world has changed. This country is in political flux. So we're not sure whether or not the money will come as a result of that. So we have to ask ourselves the following questions. Do we trust a Tory government, either the current one or the next lot, who are the Brexiters? And the answer to that question, Mr. Mayor, I hope is in unison, no. Right? We don't trust them. Do we really trust them on delivering on their side of the deal? Because this is where we get to the critical issue of this proposal. Do we really trust them on delivering on this deal? Or at some point in the future, are we going to sit in this chamber and be told that with another stroke of the pen, that 70 million that we all agree this city really needs will never be delivered? But actually, we'll be saddled with a devolved structure which is not democratic. It's not in the interest of the people of this city. It's not in the interest of the people of the surrounding area of this city. And it's something we need to think very carefully before we support this proposal. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Herbert, you have the right to reply.
Before you interrupt me, how long do I have?
You have 5 minutes, but I might give you a little bit of latitude because there's a lot to reply to.
All right, well, I won't test the patience of the council. If we just take the housing offer, Councillor Cantrell is quite right. If we say no, there will be no housing offer. It is bound into devolution. So, without raking over old history, in terms of Councillor Cantrell's party trust with the Tories for 5 years, we have to deal with the government of the day. That is the nature of the way British democracy works. And as a couple of speakers have said, quite rightly, my view of where the British economy lies is it's in treacherous waters, really treacherous waters, and the Cambridge economy will not be immune, but we have real strengths in this city. We have strengths across Cambridgeshire, and therefore, where I see devolution developing is a real understanding between government and the pressing need for them to have the tax income to actually sustain an economy which is going to be under considerable stress and distress and problem. So, to start with, the relationship in terms of this geography is a powerful relationship of an area that's really important nationally. Whilst, as Councillor Hipkin rightly says, we, and I'm sure the County Labour Group tomorrow, will stress the fact that we cannot solve Cambridge's problems by ourselves. We cannot. Our boundaries don't even go to the last house. In the future, rail can enable people to afford to commute from different parts of this county from houses a third of the price of a lot of the housing in this city. A third of the price. So I do find it difficult to listen to some of the contributions from the people, from the members opposite, because what you're basically saying is, forget the deal, let's just soldier on, we can sort out Cambridge's problems without really working with the rest of Cambridgeshire, without really engaging with government. This government, whether or not there's more elections to come, doesn't have housing on its agenda. But this deal isn't just, Mr Mayor, about this 5 years. I urge Councillor Cantrell and other councillors opposite to look at exactly what its impacts are on the housing revenue account. It generates rent. It isn't even debt. It isn't even loan. So it is actually pumping value-needed blood into the resource of our housing revenue account that under other policies is being damaged. At the moment, it's the only deal of its kind, albeit that there are brother and sister deals in Ipswich and Norwich. It's the only deal of its kind in the country. And on Councillor O'Connell's point, in terms of the high value asset sales, what we're saying is we haven't started that argument yet. So we will argue, if they are going to come forward with this, for as big a share as we can get out of the high value asset sales. And on that particular thread, they don't know how many housing associations right to buys are going to happen. They're discovering that people in housing association accommodation are a lot poorer than they thought, and the right to buy estimates that they envisaged would be liberated to damage social housing are not going to come forward. So there's still arguments to be had on that. But I urge this council not to reject the housing offer of £70 million, because it will inject money, Councillor Beard and Councillor Cantrell, that will build another 750 estimated homes through the rent income that will be generated. So irrespective of any other freedoms that we have and how we work the HRA over 25 years, this deal will build, I believe, 1,250 council homes during the life of the HRA. Now, I accept there are other issues to be looked at, and it is a question of judgment. So it's up to the party opposite to judge whether or not this deal is good enough. Manchester is on to its 4th devolution deal, and they're not soft touches. They've been negotiating hard, and I imagine that we will negotiate in the future. Governance and democracy. We used to have a region. It was run by EDA, an unelected body. We had a regional body having regional plans, where we were one of about 50 councillors on that body. This county has had a Tory council as a county council, I think, for 32 years out of the last 40. It is wrong, I think, Councillor Messinger, to reflect on this being a completely new tier. We already have that tier. This is a convoluted tier, and there are issues of democracy, there are issues of public scrutiny, and there is a notional scrutiny committee, but I think the real scrutiny is the power that's exercised. Councillor Messinger, you said there are 6 Tory majority councils. Well, fortunately, there's only 5 at the moment, out of 7, but inherently, it always has been, outside of this city, that nature of the politics. I believe that we can negotiate through on that combined authority. We won't always get our own way, but we've had significant influence so far. It isn't an ideal form of visible democracy, but I just feel that the fundamental part of it is that Cambridge always has to do deals. We've had to do deals with South Cambridgeshire. They've got land, we haven't. We will have to improve the infrastructure across the county because we need to locate homes further away, because we need to have rail investment. Councillor Gillespie asked about bus franchising. I have talked to people who know about the buses bill. I haven't read it in detail because up until now I've just focused on what we can do rather than what we possibly could do. I'm told that there are genuine powers of bus franchising, and certainly in terms of If we're going to transform the city in terms of buses as well as tackling congestion, we have to have a much more level playing field between us and the biggest bus operator in this city. How can we have successful buses if we can't negotiate on issues like fares and on routes? How can we have it so that there are other opportunities? So, on balance, I recommend to the council, but I'll listen to the views that the deal is supported. I will be very quick, Mr. Mayor, but there are three interlinked, A 1, 2 and 3. There is 4 which is committed to a consultation process and the final decision after that. My final point in the limited time I'm allowed is to say those 3 or 4 months are precious. We will see how national politics is shaping up. We will see if this is a group of politicians that we can trust. We will see if they've still got time for national issues as well as all of the time that's going to be consumed in unravelling or trying to defend the rights of European citizens here and all of the other issues that the city cares deeply about. We will have a chance. Now, if people make a judgment, we don't trust them already, I can understand it. But I will give them the chance, and I urge this council to give them a chance before that decision is made.
Thank you everybody for the way you've conducted yourself during this debate. It's been a difficult subject and a large subject. I have allowed some speakers a little more latitude than I will. Don't take that as a sign of weakness. It'll be back to normal at the next council meeting. I'll now go to the vote on the amendments. Councillor Herbert's amendments. Those in favour of amendment to recommendation 4? All those in favour?
So, 24.
Those against? Those against?
None.
Those in favour of new recommendation 5?
Unanimous.
Now we'll move to Councillor Vick's. Those against? Unanimous. Councillor Vick's amendments. Those in favour of new recommendation 6? And those against? Those in favour of new recommendation 7?
Unanimous.
Thank you. Now to vote on the recommendations as amended. Does the council wish to take them separately?
Mr. Mayor, certainly the recommendations 1 to 3 are a group that can only stand and fall together. So I think it would be misleading to the outside world if they were taken together.
Mr. Mayor, we took separate votes on points of amendments. Just indicated. I suggest we take separate votes on parts of the May resolution as amended, because it's only natural to.
I will take advice. Hold on a second. After having taken advice from my learned friends to my right, recommendations 1, 2 and 3 can only be taken together, and as a whole, so we'll take those as one vote. All those in favour of recommendations 1, 2 and 3, please show. And those against? Those in favour of recommendation 4? As amended.
We've already voted on the rest. That's a consultation.
Yeah, so we voted in favour.
That's how you can referendum do like that.